because I was asked to talk about my experience in my life and how I proceeded from clinical medicine to AI. And I think it's great to have this talk where we're talking about collaboration. And your last talk went right to what I was going to talk about, which is attention. And so this is exactly what I want to make sure that we elicit amongst the youth, and that we pay attention, number one, to what we're doing, but number two, that we pay attention to what we are putting attention to. And one of the big issues with AI is it is directing your attention. It is deciding what to show your attention to. And so it is really important that we infuse that AI with the love or the relationship that is a doctor. A doctor is not a person. When he acts as a professional, he acts in a relationship with a patient. And so I want to talk about my experience and where I developed and how I learned things, except I can't turn it. How do you change the last slide? Nope.
Let's see. Oh, we might have to, if you just say that next slide, AV's got it. There.
Okay, AV slide. So, no, I am an old lady in a young field. And no, I'm not born in 1903, but not so far. But it is amazing to think that the EKG was brought to the world in 1903. That's not that long ago. And our field, an electrophysiology field, started not that far after that, and it's a very, very young field. Next slide. In fact, I put one of the very first defibrillators in. And when I did put the defibrillator in, it wasn't me, it was a surgeon, because it required you to have open chest, put some patches, and the defibrillator was this big. And my first talk was on the inefficiency of the ICD, because the patients with ICDs were dying more than the people on antiarrhythmics, because they were committing suicide, because it was so difficult to have one. Now, and throughout my career, we went from that to a defibrillator that can be put without putting any leads anywhere, only on under the skin, and the box is implanted here. Now, to make that happen, it required a huge amount of collaboration amongst electrophysiologists. And in our time, as you saw, my first job was director of GW. I left Penn to become director of the GW-EP lab. Think about that. That's how small the field was at my time. And so it required collaboration, but the team of electrophysiologists would go to meetings, and we were all there, all 100, whatever of us. And so the person that was working on defibrillation and the person that was working on battery life and the person working on arrhythmias, they were all in the same room. Next slide. Then comes the internet, and there begins the biggest problem. Of course, a lot of excitement, but a lot of problems, because what happens with internet is you start having disconnect. And so now you have patients over here, and you have to think about them over here, and you have another problem, which is that you have things coming from different sources. Next slide. So each of the defibrillator companies had their own source, and that started to become a problem, because now I'm supposed to be telling patients things, but I'm supposed to know the engineering of these companies, because they're asking me, how do I send you a transmission? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know. Next slide. And each company has several different connectivity devices as it progresses. Next slide. And not only that, but we're able to implant much faster, much quicker, and so the volumes are getting larger and larger and larger. And just when you thought it was getting bad, next slide, we start giving the patient themselves the capacity to send you information anytime, anywhere, anyhow. Now this sounds all very funny until, next slide, you realize what they're sending you is a FIM, which means they could have a stroke in the next 6 hours. Or even worse, next slide, they're showing you a lot of PVCs that tell you that in the very near future, they are going to arrest. And not only that, but we're now recording that they arrested, which has a lot of legal implications. So it starts becoming very, very scary. Next slide. And we're just bombarded with red lights, yellow lights. Who's doing what? Where's where? And next slide. What was once quite a difficult task, which was to take care of your patients, became virtually impossible. In fact, so impossible that doctors started to remove themselves from the love of their patient. And that was out of necessity, out of time, out of the lack of the ownership of the workflows of the money. When I started, I ran my own office. When I finished, I was told who could be where in my office, when and how much time it would take I was supposed to spend on whatever task. None of that is because people are not kind. It was out of necessity. So what happened with the tech is that it also started to bring in new problems, that the sources were unclear. You didn't know if you were missing data. You didn't know what data you were missing. In the olden days, there was only a certain number of pieces of paper that could be in anybody's hands. So getting records, you knew where to get them. Now they're in the air, they're all over the place. It becomes much, much more difficult, as well as there's much more data coming to you that is wrong. And lastly, the whole field of the liability of the doctor changed completely. Next slide. Unfortunately, as things got more difficult, doctors didn't become more numerous. Hospital administrators became more numerous. And you look at the change in, with the occurrence of the internet, also came a lot of fear about what that internet meant, a lot of protection of the patients. And so it brought more and more onerous tasks, again, not for ill reasons, just because that was what was necessary to deal with the problems that were coming from the legislation. Next slide. So now comes the promise of AI. And you've all heard the great first two talks showing the complexity of all the information out there and how it was going to get harnessed. However, what we were promised is that vast amount of information would coming at enormous speed would be curated. And that's what the first two talks were very, very good at illustrating the potential for AI to do, to put things together. Next slide. And indeed, the previous interrogations, that's what's on the left here. Oh, next. Oh, I need to walk through my slides.
Oh, let's see if you want to. Does the remote work?
I don't.
Let's see. It should be.
Is it working? Yes, working.
Okay, great.
Yes. Became this. So instead of literally 80 pages, I now have a circle that gives me the data organized. So indeed, AI can be very useful. Now, to be clear, this is not very much AI. This is actually mostly technology, which actually is very useful, very beautiful. And not only that, but now I can focus on what, oh, still not working.
The right button.
Ah, beautiful. I can hover and see what it is that was the red on there that is telling me that I have an alert. So of course, this is all companies, all coming in the same view. This is very, very helpful, there's no question. But not only that, I also can get analytics of what's going on in my whole clinic, how many things I still have to read, how many are unread, et cetera, et cetera. Very, very useful. However, it also lets us recognize that there is still all the data, and what's great about it is it lets us start to analyze where are all these problems coming from, and maybe we can start attacking it. And so this is why I have shifted. By the way, I am actually really an old lady. My son is getting married, and I was going to retire, but instead of retiring, I decided to work on this infrastructure, knowing all the history that I had. As you heard, I've worked in basic labs, I've worked in research, I've worked in building clinics, I've worked with cath labs, so I know what all of this mess looks like. So I'm hoping I can infuse back some of the infrastructure we're going to need to bring it to the fore. So what we can do with the technology is start dissecting out where those problems are. And where AI comes in, and this is what's very important and most physicians don't understand, is that AI is going to find out things that the physician cannot find out. And here's a really good example, that EKG way back in 1903, that I've been looking at since, not 1903, but since I started in 1990. Well, I graduated in 1984. So every day looking at hundreds and hundreds of EKGs. Now, almost nobody's looking at the EKG. And surprise, surprise, AI is telling you, no, the P wave of that EKG actually can predict who is going to have AFib in sinus. You've never seen AFib in this patient. So there's stuff in there that's still in there. And I can tell you the other thing I see is because I am building this stuff, I look at the stuff directly, the EKGs coming in, and try to figure out how to work with them. And I watch what nurse practitioners do, and they do amazing jobs. But they don't have the depth to pick out the 1 in 1,000 that appears in your nose and say, oh, that guy is going to have something else. Well, this is history that we've learned. So when I joined the company, actually I'm a consultant for them, one of the things I wanted to work on is how do we infuse all of this knowledge that we have into the domain of the artificial intelligence and provide some of the background that needed to build even better tools. Because what they're building is very good, but as we can see, a lot of it's not able to scale, and a lot of it crashes. And the reason it's crashed is it doesn't have enough depth of thought, as far as I'm concerned. And so they had a tool, they were giving this first run through of machine learning of the strips that were coming in, The biggest problem we have is that there's a lot of noise in the system, and those that come through are being called AFib, and they're not. And then sometimes it's missing AFib. And so the question is, of course, machine learning should be very helpful in doing that. But we all know garbage in, garbage out. And unfortunately, the healthcare records have been built in such a way that a lot of the smart people are not engaged in it. So the data that's in there is just not even accurate, and a lot of it is not there. So physicians reading EKGs or whatever, you're not even going to see it. It's somebody signing off on something, and that's what's posted. The healthcare actually got given, but what's actually in the record is not reflected. And so I participated in building a tool that would fit many, many layers, not only machine learning, but help identify good data once it got into the system, and trying to see the future of, okay, so now you're doing sinus AFib, but you know what? I know that sometimes when I see PVCs, that's going to predict AFib, so maybe I should be helping you label that. And so with that, what we were able to do is to try to get the sinus episodes that were misclassified to occur more quickly, and to try to see if we can engage the rest of the community once we put this platform in, because it's actually presently remoting a lot of patients, and see if we can amortize the better readers, the smart physicians, find them and get them to help improve the diagnoses of the remote monitoring coming in. And of course, what I'm trying to do with this is not just to fix remote monitoring, but see how we can scale ideas that are being used on the ground into the machine learning. And indeed, with doing that, we have been able to weed out noise quite well, much, much better than there is obviously AI in the company's devices, but it's made to to minimize the liability of the company and feed it back to the doctor, and this is the problem. So what we're trying to do is to make it very clear, explainable, visible when the decisions are being made. And with this time that I've been working with the company, we've spent a lot of time sitting behind with mathematicians. This is a company that has a lot of mathematicians, trying to figure out how, in fact, can we amortize, because obviously it's great that I read EKGs. I'm probably one of the most expensive people in the healthcare system, trained as a neurosurgeon level, so we have 12 years of postgraduate. Gone through all of this. I do procedures that could be worth $1 zillion. And so obviously me labeling, that's all very lovely, but that is not scalable. And so we started talking about how could we mathematically maximize the value, triage, and have lower and higher level people involved, and start to try to think about how to actually infuse physicians into machine learning. And then while we did this, is our vision of the human face that AI should have. And obviously it would be great to have every level of physician involved in this. So where you see the cartoon person, that's the mathematician, and the lovely lady is the physician. I wonder who helped me that slide. So in any case, what you can see here is that within the timing of machine learning, there are many places that the physician needs to be embedded. And ideally, a person with good knowledge, for example, obviously in setting up what it is that you're trying to do. You'd be surprised how many of the mathematicians thought they understood what they were doing. And then when I talked with them, they were like, oh, there's so much more depth to what we're trying to do. And I was like, yeah, so we should really put that depth early. Let's get the cement built properly so that we have a beautiful house at the end. And even in the math that is given to us, so we as physicians also need to understand what is that AI doing so that we can assess whether or not the results are something that are meaningful to us. Not just mathematically meaningful, but actually practically meaningful. The mathematicians feel like they're supposed to get perfection, but healthcare is not perfection. We know when we can triage out something and leave it because there's a reasonable chance we're wrong, but that's okay, we'll revisit it later, and the risk of being wrong is not very high, versus I cannot let anybody die suddenly. Obviously, I can certainly let somebody have a little bit of first chest pain, maybe, So you have to figure out where you're gonna put your attention. We have been trained, physicians, what they do day in and day out is take on risk, recognize the risk benefit, take on their attention to whatever it is that they need to pay attention to. It now has been quite frequently directed to us by above, you only have 10 minutes to see a patient. But that's not really how we used to practice. We used to practice recognizing ahead of time who was coming, spending the time needed, apportioning your time. So there's a lot of complexity to what we do that is not in the AI, embedded in the AI. And then another very important thing is how we are going to implement the tools that are found. And a lot of the time, what we're seeing is it's not getting adopted because we forget that for patients to follow, it usually requires you to have a good relationship with them. If they trust you, they'll do what you say. If they don't, they won't. And so we need to embed some of that into the artificial intelligence. And so I dissected back out and reminded everybody that a physician's thought process is actually very, very complex. So the last thing I want to say is we need to rethink what is the focus. The focus is not the patient. The focus is the doctor-patient relationship. That is a very mobile thing. And when we think about that, what it actually shows you is that we are going in circles all the time, correct circles, of thinking about how to deliver care. And not only does it go in one way, it goes in depth as well. So every time there's a new action, it needs to feed back into you. That's extremely complex. We need to build that into the healthcare system. So this is a slide showing teaching. We need to start thinking about how we're going to teach the old school stuff that was not known, and that's not going to be easy. And I propose that we should be making a new role that involves mathematicians and physicians in thinking out how we are going to produce this AI. In the words of Einstein, the world is your oyster.
Future of Care is New York City's premier community for healthcare innovation. To learn more, subscribe to our channel and visit our website at futureofcare.nyc.